Today we're going to talk about how to make an ex miserable without you. And really what I want to do is take a look at the 7 techniques or things that I've noticed over my decade of coaching individuals who are trying to get their exes back that actually work. So each one of these things I'm going to be talking about have very specific stories, research, or other success proof that kind of backs up what they're trying to say. So let's just jump right into it. The very first thing to make an ex miserable without you is to simply implement a no contact rule. This, without a doubt, is probably the most popular / universal answer that you're going to see when you do research on this topic. Everyone's going to be talking about the no contact rule, but what maybe people don't talk about so much is why it has the potential to make an ex miserable without you. Basically, the no contact rule utilizes 3 psychological strategies that make it more likely that an ex is going to be thinking about you in the post-breakup period. I'm actually going to only talk about 2 of those psychological underpinnings because one of them I'm going to dedicate an entire section to. So the 2 that I think are particularly relevant for the no contact rule in and of itself is simply the theory of reactance. So reactance is a psychological concept that basically states that we are all born with what we believe to be behavioral freedoms. And you take that behavioral freedom away, they react in ways to try to obtain that behavioral freedom back. So the no contact rule obviously gives you the freedom of talking to your ex after a breakup, but the no contact rule actually takes that freedom away. And so simply by association, it can make an ex more likely to try to reobtain that freedom in the post-breakup period. But I've actually found that there is some conflicting research against this. We've found that most of our clients' exes tend to be avoidant and they don't tend to reach out to you a lot during the no contact rule. So what this basically means is that while reactance exists, and we certainly do see situations where exes blow up your phone in the middle of a no contact rule, it is actually not the norm. Instead, the no contact rule has the potential of implementing something called the information gap theory. The no contact rule kind of acts as a buffer so that your ex can't see what you're up to, or they can see what you're up to, but only from afar. Meaning through means like social media updates and things like that. There's a bit of an information gap. There's information they don't know. So they're kind of left out to dry, and that can sometimes make them feel a lot of remorse and regret. And I actually think that's a little bit more of an accurate reason for why the no contact rule can be effective, because we're finding that the no contact rule is only so effective as much as the effort that you put into it. People who do it with the sole intention of manipulating their ex or trying to make their ex miss them will end up being in for a rude awakening, because that's not really how the no contact rule operates from what we've seen. We've actually seen it's what you do during the no contact rule and the information gap that your ex doesn't have about you, what you're up to, that makes them more curious, and so curious enough that they want to close that information gap. The second way is if you have kids, have your ex watch them solo. This is a little bit of a personal flourish, but one of our first success stories that we ever had come through this program was Coach Shauna. So Shauna, she's been with us since, maybe early 2015, 2016, somewhere around there. And what made her situation interesting was that she initially came through the program because her ex broke up with her right after she had her second child with him, which is really difficult, as you can see. And so one of the things that my wife recommended for her to do was start having the ex watch the kids without any help. Anyone who has any kids understands just how much of a time commitment they are. You're responsible for this little human being. It's a 24/7 job. You kind of don't get to do what you want to do. And it just becomes this all-encompassing thing. And what was interesting about Shauna's situation is she obviously implemented this, but what I think happened along the way is when we're in a relationship with someone, especially if we have kids together with that person, usually it's not always 50-50, especially at the beginning. the mother is often going to be the one watching the child more. And sometimes what I've noticed is men can take that fact for granted. And when they are roles are reversed, so to speak, they start to gain a new appreciation for what their ex potentially did and that they didn't realize how hard it was. And it kind of allows for a greater understanding of how difficult, a woman's life is. And I think that's kind of what happened with Shauna in her situation. Now, she obviously got her ex back. She's now married to him. What I think is kind of interesting about this is her ex gained a greater understanding of what her everyday life was like. And I felt like that understanding created a bridge for them to get back together. The third way that you can make your ex miserable without you is something called the Frank Sinatra effect. So Frank Sinatra, he's known for this famous quote, "The best revenge in life is massive success." And really, the best way to make your ex miserable without you is for them to see you having massive success without them. It is truly the best revenge. I'm kind of a big fan of the KISS method, keep it super simple. And I think a lot of times, especially when it comes to the self-help niche, a lot of experts out there try to make things way more complicated than they need to be. The truth is that pretty much all of self-help can be boiled down into one singular idea, and that singular idea is improve yourself. If you live your life just by simply spending every day trying to improve yourself or improve your circumstances in some way, good things will happen. And so I think that kind of wraps nicely with the Frank Sinatra effect. The best revenge in life is massive success. Well, in order to obtain that massive success, you need to improve your circumstances in some way. Maybe your circumstances are already great, but maybe they're not. And if they're not, try the KISS method. Keep it super simple, and the most simple thing to do is improve yourself. It just boils down to one thing. You approach life with that mentality, and good things will end up happening. The fourth way that you can make your ex miserable without you is traveling to a place that they've always wanted to visit. This one might be a little passive aggressive, so I feel like you need to be careful with this, especially if you weren't great at communicating in the past. But one of the things that I have seen work for our clients is, let's say that in the relationship, you and your ex would talk often about their desire to want to visit New Zealand. And that was maybe a lifelong dream for them. But for whatever reason, that just didn't happen. But let's say after the breakup, you have an opportunity to travel to New Zealand with a friend. Do you take it? Well, yeah. Because if they see that you're living their dreams without them, they will grow jealous and potentially even a little bit angry. And I think that's the part that freaks people out. It's important to remember that the opposite of love isn't hate, it's indifference. If your ex is angry at you, it means on some level they still care. And on a very big level, they're miserable without you because you are going to a place that they've always wanted to visit. But it doesn't always have to be something specifically targeted at that ex. It can be just traveling to a really great place, a place that they would be enviable not to be by your side on. Because I think that's kind of the long pole in the tent. It's all about having them feel the opportunity cost lost. So opportunity cost obviously is this concept of you invest your money here at the expense of this other opportunity here. And usually the opportunity cost can work out if what you chose to do, where you chose to invest your money, took off. But it doesn't work out if where you chose to invest your money does not take off. And instead, this other thing that you overlooked did take off. And this is kind of what you're trying to do. If your ex, after a breakup, sees you traveling to this really great place and they think to themselves, man, I wish I was there with her or with him, then that is probably one of the best ways to make your ex miserable without you. The fifth thing is going to be derived from a success story that I had the pleasure of interviewing a couple of years ago, and that is going on dates with other people. So I interviewed this woman who was named Jamie Cantrell, and she had a really interesting story. She came through the program. She successfully had her ex ask for her back, and she chose not to get back with him. But after finding this interview, I decided to take a specific quote from it, because I think it distills down the importance of her philosophy, which is 100% controversial. We'll get into that in a moment, about going on dates with other people. So here's what Jamie had to say. The one thing that worked for me, and a lot of people may criticize this because I know I put it on the community post, and some people said, I don't think that's right what you're doing, but I decided to jump right back into the dating scene immediately for a couple of reasons. Number one, I thought I didn't have time. She was 53 years old. She's a goal-oriented person, and she wanted a loving, committed relationship, and so she's just going to go after it. But she's very, very picky, so it has to be with the right guy, and I knew I was going to have a long search. The other thing was I did not want to jump back into dating, which is a little bit contradictory. So I did the one thing that I didn't feel like personally I wanted to. I was crying on the way to the date, and I actually even felt sadder on the way home from the date. My heart was still broken, but like a job, I forced myself to go out and meet people. What I found was it did several things. Number one, it allowed me to practice being ungettable, to practice being flirty yet confident, to practice getting back to that place I knew I should be. The second thing it did was I met some really great guys. At first I thought, I'm never going to fall in love again. My ex is it. My ex is the love of my life. But after a lot of dates, around the 10th one, I met a guy that I thought, hey, I think I kind of like him. And that helped me a lot. It made me realize that even if it doesn't work out with this guy, I found him so I can find more. So the thing that worked the best, and this may be a little controversial, is that I think you should put it in your program because it works brilliantly to go on dates with other people. So Jamie obviously went to an extreme of jumping into the dating scene, but ironically, it kind of works. So there's actually some research that backs this up. If you move on to a rebound quite quickly after a breakup, it can actually help you cope with the breakup. Though I think there's some interestingly conflicting research out there that suggests that moving on to a rebound too much can actually have the opposite effect long term. So it might help you in the short term to get over your previous ex, but long term, it's kind of a poor coping mechanism. But needless to say, what was interesting about Jamie, and I think kind of the one thing she's trying to get home here, is that second point that she made. She said she met really great guys. She, started out going on these dates with some of these guys and thinking, I'm not feeling it. My ex is the love of my life. But eventually she found one guy where she kind of liked him. And that recognition helped her a lot to realize, hey, there's other people out there that can make me feel this way. It's not just my ex. And I think this is such an important thing to do, and why going on dates with other people can be incredibly profound if you can kind of get past it, past the initial wariness that you may be having. But I think the thing that's really important to remember is don't force yourself to go on a date when you are personally not feeling it. Just know that there is going to be a bit of a miserable period if you do try to do this. There's also that added benefit, and I haven't talked a lot about this, and this could be the easily argued added benefit of, hey, your ex sees you on the date with someone else, they get jealous. That makes them more miserable. But I actually like to focus on the internal aspects of this because I think Jamie has a real big point. It allows you to put your time with your ex in perspective and make you recognize that there are other options out there for you. The next thing is to have a professional goal. You'd be really surprised at how often we get individuals who don't ever think about this. And to kind of put this in perspective, I'm actually going to cite from a success story that I stumbled across today. So this individual said about 2.5 years ago, my ERP ex, who's now my boyfriend, and I broke up. And then I started this program. Amongst other issues, one of the reasons from our breakup was his concern about my financial future and the direction or lack thereof of my career. He wasn't wrong about my lack of a plan, so I applied the principles of this program and stepped way out of my comfort zone to focus only on myself and see what I could do better in my life in just a few months. So I filled my social media with positive, interesting, and non-emotional content only, spent time on physical health and appearance, connected with old and new friends, and earned a professional certification. And even when I got my ex back, I kept investing in myself. I earned another professional certification. I began an MBA program, further sophisticated my style, took on a challenging job I was intimidated by, landed another job despite imposter syndrome, strategically expanded my network of connections, consistently practiced soothing my anxiety, and focused less on pleasing others and more on caring for myself. So here's the point. Having a professional goal is important, but I think the bigger thing to make a point about here is it's just kind of having goals in general. So one of the things I'm really big about is this idea of having a global goal for each pillar of the Trinity. If you're not familiar with the Trinity, one of the things I explain to my clients is that it's really important that you divide your life up into 3 distinct points: health, wealth, and relationships. And it's important you have a global goal that you're trying to achieve for each one of these things. And most of the people who come into my orbit have a global goal for the relationships pillar. They want to get their ex back, and they eventually probably want to end up or get married to this ex. But you'd be surprised at how little other type of goals, global goals, they have in the health area or the wealth area. So the health global goal can be something as simple as like finishing a marathon, but usually it's best to have an achievable, yes, no, pass, fail type of a goal. But what I found interesting about this success story was she really harped on the wealth global goal. She wanted to do better in her career, do the one thing that we all want to do, which is make more money. And she was able to achieve that. And because she was able to achieve that, she was able to foray that into the other areas of her Trinity. And that made her more of an attractive candidate, probably not just to her ex, but to other people as well. And the final thing to bookend this comes back to what we were talking about at the very beginning with the Zgarnik Effect. So you may not think that I was talking about this at the very beginning, but I was. So the Zeigarnik Effect is this concept that was founded by this Russian psychologist named Bluma Zgarnik. And she basically found that people tend to remember interrupted or incomplete things better than completed things or non-interrupted things. So when you actually implement a no contact rule on your ex, for example, one of the things that if you did it abruptly can occur is the Zgarnik Effect kind of creates this cliffhanger effect where you have this natural inclination to want to close the loop. The analogy I always give is imagine someone walked into your house and left the door open, and they just started walking around your house and asking you for a tour. Well, while you're giving them this tour around your house, all you're thinking about is they left the door open and all the things that could happen. Someone can come in and steal your stuff. A bug can come in, a wasp can come in, you name it. And it bugs you so much that you want to go back and close the door. That is the Zgarnik Effect in a nutshell. But what we found is it can be actually applied when you actually do start interacting with your ex in the post-breakup period. So one of the ways that we found that you can kind of keep momentum going is to implement the Zgarnik Effect in your conversations with your ex. So I always talk about this graphic that I put together on my website that kind of shows you the flow of a conversation. And you know how a conversation can have highs, it can have peaks, it can have valleys. But the idea is what we're always trying to do in our gut is to try to identify the peak of a conversation and then end that conversation abruptly in a non-rude way, but doing so will trigger the Zgarnik Effect and make your ex more likely to want to talk to you or finish the conversation. And if you do this enough times, it can create this interesting effect. The reason I know this can make someone miserable is because this is exactly what my wife did to me when we were in the talking phase before I married her. We had a long distance relationship, and one of the things that she would do to me constantly was her phone would die, but she wouldn't immediately charge the phone up and call me back. Sometimes I wouldn't hear from her again until the very next day, or sometimes I wouldn't hear from her again until a few hours. But the fact that the conversation was interrupted just triggered me so much. And it didn't trigger me in an angry way. It started making me doubt what we were building and made me think, well, maybe she's not as into me as I am into her. Because if it was me, I would just simply call her back. It feels kind of rude not to call someone back, but maybe she doesn't like me as much as I like her. And that doubt creates not only more interest, but more value, obviously, but it can be a pretty miserable experience. But we've often found that misery often comes before regret.